The Forehead Kiss, A Spiritual Journey from Friendship to Sacred Love, by David Rousseau. There is a kind of kiss that asks for nothing, no hunger, no performance, no rush. A kiss on the forehead says, I see your soul before I touch your body. Some relationships are not built through seduction. They are built through safety, through presence, through quiet understanding, and sometimes, the deepest love story begins as friendship, not because passion was missing, but because the soul needed time to recognize itself in another human being. This audiobook is not about manipulation. It is not about tricks to make someone fall for you. It is about spiritual attraction, energetic intimacy, emotional trust, and the sacred moment when friendship becomes love. Tonight, we explore the meaning of the forehead kiss and the invisible bridge between companionship and romance. Introduction. The sacred space between friendship and love. There are connections in life that arrive like lightning, fast, intense, unforgettable, and then there are connections that arrive like morning light, quietly, softly, almost unnoticed at first. The kind of bond that begins with conversation instead of seduction, with comfort instead of performance, with emotional safety instead of emotional chaos. These are the relationships that often change us most deeply. Many people spend their lives searching for passion, believing love must begin with overwhelming chemistry or dramatic attraction. But spiritual love rarely enters with noise. It enters with recognition, a feeling, a calmness, a strange sense that your spirit can finally rest in the presence of another human being. Before romance becomes physical, it becomes emotional. Before two people become lovers, they learn how to become safe for one another. They learn how to listen, how to stay, how to understand silence without needing to fill it. This is why friendship can become one of the holiest foundations for love. Friendship removes the mask. It allows the people to meet without the pressure of perfection, without the exhausting need to impress. In friendship, people reveal themselves slowly, their fears, their humor, their wounds, their tenderness. And over time, something sacred begins to happen. The soul recognizes itself, not through fantasy, but through presence, not through possession, but through peace. This is the invisible bridge between friendship and romance that so many people struggle to explain. It is not built through manipulation or strategy. It is built through emotional intimacy, energetic trust, and the quiet unfolding of authentic connection. And perhaps no gesture symbolizes this more beautifully than a forehead kiss. Unlike a kiss driven by desire, a forehead kiss carries reverence. It is gentle, intentional, almost prayer-like in its energy. It says, I honor your spirit before I seek your body. Across many spiritual traditions, the forehead is associated with intuition, inner wisdom, and consciousness, the place many call the third eye. To kiss someone there is to acknowledge more than their appearance. It is to acknowledge their humanity, their mind, their emotions, their becoming. A forehead kiss does not rush. It reassures, and in a world filled with temporary attraction and emotionally disconnected relationships, reassurance has become sacred. This audiobook is an exploration of that sacredness. Together, we will journey through the emotional and spiritual transformation that occurs when friendship deepens into love. We will explore the role of vulnerability, energetic alignment, emotional safety, presence, honesty, and soulful connection. Because love is not always found in intensity. Sometimes it is found in consistency. In the friend who notices your silence, the person who remembers the small details, the one who listens carefully when the world has ignored your pain. Sometimes the deepest romance begins long before either person speaks the words aloud. It begins in the energy between two souls who feel strangely at home with one another. And when love grows from that place, it carries a different kind of beauty, a slower beauty, a grounded beauty, a love that does not merely excite the heart, but calms the nervous system, a love that feels safe enough for truth. So as you listen, allow yourself to reflect on the connections in your own life, the people who made you feel emotionally seen, the friendships that carried unspoken tenderness, the moments where affection felt spiritual instead of performative, because perhaps the most meaningful love stories are not the ones that begin with fireworks. Perhaps they are the ones that begin with peace. And perhaps the forehead kiss is not simply a romantic gesture at all. Perhaps it is the soul whispering, "You are safe here." Chapter 1. Why friendship is the strongest foundation for love. Most people are taught to search for chemistry first, the spark, the obsession, the instant attraction that makes the heart race and the mind wander. But chemistry alone cannot sustain love. Excitement may open the door to connection, but emotional safety is what allows the people to remain there without fear. This is why some of the deepest romantic relationships begin as friendship, because friendship teaches the souls how to exist together without masks. In friendship, there is less pressure to impress, less urgency to perform. People slowly reveal who they truly are, not just the polished version, created for attraction, but the human version hidden underneath appearances. You begin to witness each other's ordinary moments, the tired conversations, the vulnerable confessions, the insecurities carefully hidden from the rest of the world. And strangely, this honesty becomes beautiful, because real love is not built on perfection, it is built on acceptance. Friendship creates the emotional foundation that many romantic relationships try to skip. It allows trust to grow naturally instead of being forced through intensity. To people learn how to support one another emotionally before they ever attempt to connect romantically. This matters deeply, because attraction without emotional safety often creates anxiety. But attraction rooted in friendship creates peace, and peace is one of the purest signs of spiritual connection. When someone feels emotionally safe, the nervous system softens, walls slowly come down, conversations become more authentic, silence becomes less uncomfortable. You no longer feel the need to constantly earn affection. You simply feel seen. This is the hidden sacredness of friendship. It teaches people how to hold space for each other emotionally, to listen without fixing, to stay without controlling, to care without demanding. And over time, emotional intimacy begins forming quietly beneath the surface, not through dramatic declarations, but through consistency. The friend who remembers your difficult days, the person who notices the change in your voice, the one who checks whether you arrived home safely. These small moments may appear ordinary, but spiritually, they are acts of love. Because love is rarely built in grand gestures alone, it is built in repeated emotional presence. Many relationships fail because people confuse attraction with compatibility. They rush into romance before trust has matured, before emotional honesty exists, before either person truly understands the other beyond fantasy. But friendship slows the process down, and what grows slowly often grows deeply. When you are friends with someone first, you witness their humanity clearly. You see how they treat others, how they handle disappointment, how they respond to stress, pain, silence, and vulnerability. The illusion fades, and if love still grows there, it becomes something far more powerful than infatuation. It becomes conscious. Spiritual love is not blind. It sees clearly and stays gently. This is why friendship can become sacred ground for romance. It creates a space where two people are free to become emotionally honest without fear of immediate rejection or performance. There is no need to pretend to be flawless, only a willingness to be real. And perhaps that is what every soul is truly searching for. Not someone to impress, but someone safe enough to be fully seen by. Because when friendship becomes love naturally, romance no longer feels like a game. It feels like coming home to someone who already knows your spirit. Chapter 2. The spiritual meaning of a forehead kiss. There are many forms of affection in this world. Some are driven by passion, some by loneliness, some by desire, attachment, or the fear of being alone. But a forehead kiss carries a different energy. It is soft without being weak, tender without demanding anything in return, quiet, yet deeply intimate. A forehead kiss does not ask for possession, it offers presence, and perhaps that is why it touches the heart so deeply. While passionate kisses often symbolize physical attraction, a forehead kiss symbolizes emotional reverence. It communicates care before desire, protection before passion. It says, "I value your peace as much as your presence." In many spiritual traditions, the forehead represents inner vision and consciousness. It is associated with intuition, wisdom, and the unseen emotional world within a person. Some call it the location of the third eye, the spiritual center connected to awareness and truth. To kiss someone on the forehead is symbolic in a profound way. It is an acknowledgement of the soul, not merely the appearance. not merely the body, but the inner self that exists beneath personality and performance. This is why a forehead kiss can feel more emotional than something far more physical, because the body may crave passion, but the soul craves safety, and safety is sacred. Many people carry invisible exhaustion within them, emotional wounds from betrayal, disappointment, relationships built on inconsistency or manipulation, hearts that learned to associate love with anxiety instead of peace. A genuine forehead kiss interrupts that pattern. It feels grounding. It reassures the nervous system rather than overstimulating it. It says, "You do not need to prove your worth here." This kind of affection heals something deeper than loneliness. It heals fear. Spiritually healthy love is not built on emotional chaos. It is not a constant struggle for validation or attention. True connection creates calmness alongside attraction. Passion may ignite love, but peace sustains it. This is why the forehead kiss holds such spiritual weight. It reflects affection without selfishness, care without control, intimacy without pressure. It is one of the rare gestures that asks for nothing while giving comfort. And often, the deepest emotional moments are the gentlest ones. A forehead kiss after tears. A forehead kiss before sleep. A forehead kiss during silence when words no longer feel necessary. These moments communicate something language cannot fully explain. Because spiritual love often speaks without speaking, energy itself becomes communication. The touch says, "I am here. I see your pain. You are not alone." In relationships rooted in emotional maturity, affection becomes intentional. Physical touch is no longer used merely for stimulation, but for connection. A hand held carefully, a long embrace, a forehead kiss placed gently during vulnerable moments. These gestures nourish the soul because they carry emotional presence, and presence is becoming rare in a distracted world. Many people know how to flirt, far fewer know how to nurture. But spiritual love nurtures naturally. It creates emotional shelter for another person's heart. It understands that tenderness is not weakness, it is emotional wisdom. The forehead kiss embodies this wisdom. It reminds us that intimacy is not always loud, not always dramatic, not always fueled by urgency. Sometimes intimacy is quiet. Sometimes the holiest form of affection is simply making another human being feel safe enough to exhale. And perhaps that is the true meaning hidden within a forehead kiss. Not seduction, not performance, but sacred reassurance. A silent promise from one soul to another that says, "You can rest here." Chapter 3. Emotional Intimacy Before Romantic Intimacy. Many people desire love, but far fewer understand intimacy. Because intimacy is not created the moment two people touch. It is created the moment two people feel emotionally safe enough to be fully seen. Long before romance becomes physical, it becomes vulnerable. This is where true connection begins. Not in performance, not in seduction, but in honesty. Modern relationships often move quickly on the surface, while remaining emotionally distant underneath. People learn each other's bodies before learning each other's fears. They share attraction before sharing truth. And eventually, the connection begins to feel empty. Because the soul cannot attach deeply to someone it does not feel safe with emotionally. Spiritual love moves differently. It understands that emotional intimacy is the foundation of lasting romance. Emotional intimacy is the quiet process of allowing another person into your inner world. It is the courage to reveal thoughts, wounds, dreams, insecurities, and truths that are normally hidden behind protective walls. At first, this vulnerability feels uncomfortable. Human beings are taught to guard themselves, to appear strong, to avoid rejection at all costs. But love cannot fully enter a guarded heart. The walls that protect us from pain often block us from connection as well. And so, friendship becomes the sacred training ground for emotional intimacy. In friendship, people slowly learn how to trust each other with the small pieces of themselves. A difficult memory share during a late-night conversation, an insecurity admitted quietly, a moment of sadness witnessed without judgment. These experiences create emotional safety, and emotional safety is one of the most attractive energies in the world, not because it excites the ego, but because it relaxes the soul. When someone listens deeply to you without trying to fix or control you, something healing happens internally. The nervous system softens. The fear of being misunderstood begins to fade. You start feeling accepted instead of evaluated. This is how emotional intimacy grows. Quietly, through consistency. The person who remembers the details you thought everyone forgot. The friend who notices when your energy changes. The one who sits with you during difficult moments, instead of disappearing when things become heavy. These gestures may seem small externally, but spiritually, they are profound, because love is not built in dramatic moments alone. It is built in repeated emotional presence. Over time, emotional intimacy creates a new kind of closeness. Silence no longer feels awkward. Conversations become more meaningful. Eye contact deepens. Trust forms naturally instead of being forced. And eventually, affection begins carrying emotional weight. A simple touch feels different when trust already exists. A hug lingers longer. A hand held gently communicates safety. A forehead kiss suddenly feels sacred, because emotional intimacy transforms physical affection into emotional language. Without emotional connection, touch can feel temporary. But with emotional intimacy, even the smallest gesture can reach the soul. This is why spiritually aligned relationships often develop slowly, not because the attraction is weak, but because the connection is deep enough to value emotional trust first. Real love does not rush vulnerability, it protects it. And healthy romance is not created by impressing someone into affection. It is created by making them feel emotionally safe enough to reveal their authentic self. That is the true bridge between friendship and love. Not chemistry alone, but emotional trust strong enough to hold honesty, softness, fear, and truth without breaking the connection. Because at the deepest level, every human heart is asking the same question: can I be fully myself with you and still be loved? And the relationships that answer yes are often the ones that change. Our lives forever. Chapter 4. Energy never lies. Before a word is spoken, something else has already spoken first. Energy. Human beings are often taught to trust language above everything else, to listen to what is said, to analyze explanations, to rely on logic and verbal reassurance. But the body knows the truth before the mind catches up. You can feel when someone is fully present with you, and you can feel when they are not. You can feel when affection is genuine, and you can feel when it is being performed. Energy never hides itself for long. Even when words are carefully chosen, energy slips through tone, timing, silence, and presence. It reveals what is real beneath the surface. This is why some connections feel instantly peaceful, even without explanation, and why others feel confusing, even when everything appears right on paper. The nervous system responds to energy before it responds to words. In spiritual connection, this awareness becomes even more important, because love is not only spoken, it is felt. When someone truly values your presence, you do not have to question it constantly. There is a consistency in how they show up, a calmness in how they engage with you, a natural respect in their attention. You feel emotionally safe without needing constant reassurance. But when energy is unstable, the body notices it immediately. Inconsistency creates tension. Mixed signals create confusion. Emotional distance creates anxiety, even if words try to disguise it. This is because truth is not carried only through language. It is carried through presence. Spiritual attraction feels different from attachment. Attachment feels urgent. It clings. It fears loss. It often comes from emotional lack. But spiritual attraction feels grounded. It does not rush. It does not force. It simply exists with awareness and calm interest. There is often excitement, yes, but beneath it, there is peace. And peace is one of the clearest signs of alignment. When two people are energetically aligned, something subtle begins to shift between them. Eye contact becomes more meaningful. Silence becomes comfortable instead of awkward. Distance feels less emotionally heavy, and presence feels nourishing rather than draining. You do not feel like you have to constantly perform a version of yourself. You feel accepted in your natural state. This is what makes friendship such a powerful space for spiritual connection, because friendship allows energy to reveal itself over time, not in a single moment of attraction, but through repeated experiences of presence and absence, honesty and silence, support and vulnerability. You begin to notice patterns. Who feels safe? Who feels inconsistent? Who brings calm into your nervous system? And who creates emotional confusion? Energy is always communicating something, even when no one is speaking. And when friendship slowly begins to shift into something deeper, energy is often the first thing to change. There is a subtle shift in awareness, a deeper noticing, a quiet sense that the connection is no longer just casual, but emotionally significant. The way someone looks at you changes. The pauses between words feel different. The presence carries more weight, and sometimes, without any declaration, affection begins to emerge in small, meaningful gestures, a longer hug, a softer tone of voice, a moment of silence that feels full instead of empty, a forehead kiss that feels less like an action and more like an emotional truth, finally expressed without words, because energy often speaks what the mouth is not ready to say. In spiritually aware love, nothing is forced. Connection either aligns, or it does not, and when it aligns, it does so naturally, without pressure. This is why learning to trust energy is essential, not to become fearful, not to overthink every interaction, but to become aware, because energy reveals the emotional reality behind connection long before labels are ever spoken. And in the deepest relationships, what we feel is often more honest than what we are told. At its core, love is not only about words exchanged between two people, it is about the invisible experience of being in someone's presence and feeling, without explanation, I am safe here. Chapter 5. The fear of ruining the friendship. There is a moment in many deep friendships that feels almost suspended in time. Something changes, but nothing is said. The conversations still happen, the laughter still flows, the connection still exists, but beneath the surface, something quieter begins to grow, a feeling that is difficult to name, not quite friendship anymore, not yet romance, something in between. And with that in-between space comes one of the most human fears. What if I ruin everything by telling the truth? This fear is not small. It is rooted in something sacred, the fear of losing a connection that has become emotionally important. Because when a friendship holds emotional intimacy, it becomes more than casual. It becomes a safe place, a familiar presence, a form of emotional grounding in a world that often feels unpredictable. And anything that feels like safety is deeply protected by the heart. So, when feelings begin to shift, the mind immediately tries to preserve what already exists. It says, stay quiet, don't risk it, don't change what is working, don't lose what you already have. But beneath that fear is something deeper, a truth trying to be acknowledged, because when emotional energy begins to evolve, silence does not make it disappear. It only keeps it unspoken, and unspoken emotions do not vanish. They linger. They create tension between what is felt and what is expressed. This is where spiritual growth enters the experience of connection. Because spiritual connection is not only about comfort, it is also about honesty. The fear of ruining a friendship is often the fear of uncertainty. If feelings are revealed, the dynamic may change. The relationship may deepen, or it may shift into distance. There is no guarantee, and the human mind struggles with that unknown space. But spiritual maturity begins to understand something important. Authentic connection can survive truth. Illusion cannot. If a friendship is real, it has room for honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, even emotional vulnerability, because truth does not destroy genuine connection. It reveals its strength or its limits. Many people stay silent not because they lack feelings, but because they are trying to control the outcome. They want certainty without risk, closeness without vulnerability, love without potential loss. But love does not grow in controlled environments. It grows in emotional truth, and truth always carries uncertainty. There are moments in life when silence feels safer than expression, when keeping feelings hidden feels like preservation. But preservation of what, exactly? A version of connection that may not be fully aligned with what is actually being felt. Because sometimes, what we are calling friendship is already carrying emotional depth that is no longer purely platonic. The energy has shifted, even if the labels have not. And when that happens, the question is not only whether feelings should be expressed, it is whether honesty will be honored within the connection. This is where courage becomes spiritual, not forceful courage, not dramatic confession, but grounded honesty, the willingness to allow truth to exist without demanding a specific outcome, to say what is real without trying to control what happens next. I value our connection deeply, I've noticed my feelings changing. I wanted to be honest with you rather than hide it. These words do not destroy connection. They reveal its structure, because after honesty, one of two things becomes clear. Either the connection can expand into something deeper, or it cannot. But either way, clarity replaces confusion, and clarity is emotionally liberating, even when it is difficult. The fear of ruining a friendship often assumes that silence is safer than truth. But silence can also create distance in a different form. Emotional distance inside a connection that looks unchanged on the outside. Spiritual connection values alignment over illusion. It understands that love cannot be forced, but it also cannot be hidden forever without emotional cost. And sometimes, the most loving thing a person can do, for themselves and for the connection, is to allow truth to be spoken into the space between them, because what is real does not fear being seen, and what is meant to grow will not be destroyed by honesty. It will either deepen, or it will reveal that its path was meant to change. Either way, truth becomes the doorway, not to loss, but to clarity. Chapter 6. The difference between attachment and soulful love. Not every feeling that resembles love is actually love. Some emotions feel like love in the beginning, but are rooted in something much heavier: need, fear, loneliness, emotional dependency. This is where attachment begins to disguise itself as connection. Attachment often arrives quietly at first. It forms in the spaces where emotional security is inconsistent, where validation feels unpredictable, where presence feels conditional rather than steady. And slowly, the mind begins to hold on tighter, not because the connection is always nourishing, but because the idea of losing it feels unbearable. Attachment says, "I need you so I can feel whole." It turns another person into an emotional anchor, a source of stability, a cure for internal emptiness. The connection becomes less about mutual growth and more about emotional survival. In attachment, love starts to feel like tension. There is excitement, but also anxiety. There is desire, but also fear. There is closeness, but also insecurity. It becomes difficult to breathe freely within the connection, because something inside is always afraid of losing it. Soulful love is different. It does not demand emotional dependence to exist. Instead, it grows between two people who are already learning to stand within themselves. Soulful love says, "I choose you, not because I need you to complete me, but because I value who we are together." This kind of love does not collapse the self. It expands it. In soulful connection, there is space. Space for individuality. Space for emotional truth. Space for growth that does not require control. Two people are able to remain whole while still being deeply connected. This is one of the most important differences between attachment and spiritual love. Attachment tightens. Soulful love allows. Attachment fears distance. Soulful love trusts connection even in separation. Attachment tries to hold on. Soulful love learns to remain present without grasping. In many friendships that begin to deepen emotionally, both energies can exist at the same time. There may be genuine care, real affection, and deep emotional bonding, but also fear of loss, uncertainty, and unspoken dependency. This is where awareness becomes essential, because without awareness, attachment can quietly begin to shape the connection. It can turn affection into expectation, presence into obligation, love into emotional pressure. But when awareness is present, something shifts. You begin to notice, am I loving this person? Or am I afraid of losing how they make me feel? Am I choosing them freely, or holding on because I fear emptiness? These questions are not meant to create doubt. They are meant to create clarity. Because spiritual love is not blind attachment, it is conscious connection. One of the most healing truths in love is this: you are not meant to lose yourself in order to keep someone else. Healthy love does not require self-abandonment. It requires self-awareness. When two emotionally grounded individuals come together, the connection changes in quality. It becomes less about filling gaps and more about sharing presence. There is appreciation instead of desperation, trust instead of fear, choice instead of dependency. And in this space, affection becomes something different. A touch no longer feels like reassurance against abandonment. A message no longer feels like proof of worth. A moment of silence no longer feels like rejection, because the foundation is no longer fear. It is stability. This is where soulful love begins to feel calm, not empty, but peaceful. And this peace is often misunderstood in a world that equates intensity with love. But spiritual connection teaches a different lesson. Real love does not always feel like emotional chaos. Sometimes it feels like emotional safety. Sometimes it feels like being able to exhale fully in someone's presence without wondering when it will be taken away. Attachment says, "Stay, or I will lose myself." Soulful love says, "Stay, but I am still myself." And perhaps this is the deepest transformation in the journey from friendship to love. Not just learning how to love another person, but learning how to love without losing yourself in the process. Chapter 7. How Presence Creates Romantic Energy. Romantic energy is not always created through words. It is often created through attention. Not the kind of attention that is distracted or half-present. Not the kind that listens while waiting to speak, but the kind of presence that is fully here, fully aware, and fully engaged with another human being in real time. Presence is one of the rarest forms of love in today's world, because most people are physically near each other, but mentally elsewhere, thinking ahead, replaying the past, checking devices, splitting attention between many directions at once. But when someone is truly present with you, something within you notices immediately. The nervous system relaxes. You feel seen without needing to explain yourself. This is where romantic energy begins to form, not through performance, but through recognition. People do not fall in love only with appearance. They fall in love with how they feel in someone's presence. Do they feel safe? Do they feel valued? Do they feel emotionally understood? Or do they feel overlooked, rushed, or unseen? These internal sensations shape connection far more than most people realize. Presence communicates something deeper than language. It says, "You matter enough for me to be here fully." And in spiritual connection, that message carries weight. When two people begin to share consistent presence with each other, something subtle starts to shift. Conversations become more meaningful. Silence becomes more comfortable. Emotional honesty becomes easier to access. There is less need to impress, and more willingness to simply be. This is often how friendship begins to deepen into something more, not through sudden dramatic change, but through accumulated moments of real attention. A conversation where no one is rushing to end it. A moment where eye contact lasts slightly longer than usual. A silence that feels calm instead of awkward. A shared experience that feels emotionally significant without needing explanation. Presence creates emotional safety, and emotional safety creates intimacy. This is why people often underestimate the power of simply being fully present with someone. It does not require grand gestures. It does not require perfect words. It requires awareness, consistency, and sincerity. In a world filled with distraction, presence becomes rare, and what is rare often becomes deeply valued. Over time, consistent presence creates a quiet emotional bond. You begin to associate that person with a feeling of calm familiarity. Their presence starts to feel grounding. Their attention feels meaningful. And slowly, affection begins to grow within that space. Not forced, not rushed, but naturally emerging from emotional trust. This is where romantic energy begins to form in a subtle way. A shift in how silence feels. A deeper awareness of each other's emotional states. A natural comfort in closeness that does not need explanation. And sometimes, it expresses itself in simple, meaningful gestures. A longer pause before saying goodbye. A softer tone of voice when speaking. A moment of hesitation that carries emotion. A touch that feels intentional rather than accidental. Presence turns ordinary interactions into emotionally charged moments, because when someone is fully present with you, even small things begin to carry significance. In spiritually aware love, presence is more important than intensity. Intensity can fade quickly. It can be driven by emotion, attraction, or temporary excitement. But presence builds something slower and more stable. It builds trust, and trust is what allows love to deepen without fear. When presence is consistent, emotional walls begin to lower naturally. There is less need to guard every thought, less need to hide every feeling, more willingness to be honest, even in subtle ways. And in that emotional openness, connection becomes more real. This is the quiet foundation where friendship begins to transform, not through pressure, but through attention that feels safe. and when two people consistently feel safe in each other's presence, emotional intimacy naturally grows, and sometimes, without planning, without intention, without expectation, that intimacy begins to feel like something more, something warmer, something deeper, something closer to what people call love. But at its core, it is still the same thing, to human beings learning how to be fully present with each other, and discovering that presence itself can feel like home. Chapter 8. Vulnerability is the bridge. Every meaningful connection eventually arrives at the same threshold, a quiet, invisible edge between what is felt and what is spoken, and standing at that edge is vulnerability. Vulnerability is often misunderstood as weakness, but in truth, it is one of the highest forms of emotional courage. It is the willingness to be seen without control over how you will be received. To be vulnerable is to remove the mask, not suddenly, not recklessly, but honestly. It is the moment a person stops hiding their inner world and allows another human being to witness it. The thoughts they usually silence, the emotions they usually manage, the fears they usually bury beneath composure. Vulnerability says, "This is who I am when I am not performing," and that kind of truth changes the energy of a connection immediately. In friendship, vulnerability often begins in small ways. A story shared that has never been told before, a quiet confession during a late-night conversation, a moment of honesty that feels slightly uncomfortable but also relieving. These moments matter more than people realize, because every time vulnerability is met with understanding instead of judgment, trust deepens. And trust is the foundation of emotional intimacy. Without vulnerability, relationships remain at the surface, polite, comfortable, safe, but not deeply connected. Two people may enjoy each other's presence, but never truly reach the inner layers where real emotional bonding happens. Vulnerability is what allows those inner layers to be shared. It is the bridge between emotional distance and emotional closeness, but it requires risk. There is always the fear of rejection, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear that honesty might change the relationship in ways that cannot be controlled, and so many people hold back. They protect the connection by protecting themselves, but in doing so, they also limit depth, because love cannot grow fully in guarded soil. At some point, emotional truth must be allowed to exist in the space between two people, not forced, not demanded, but offered, softly, honestly, without manipulation. "I need to tell you something I've been feeling. I don't usually share this, but I trust you. I've been afraid to say this out loud." These are not just sentences, they are openings, and every opening in a relationship is a chance for deeper connection or deeper understanding. Sometimes vulnerability is met with warmth, with acceptance, with a mutual sharing of truth that brings two people closer together than before, and sometimes it is met with distance or uncertainty. But even then, vulnerability serves a purpose, because clarity is better than emotional guessing. Spiritual connection does not grow from perfection. It grows from honesty that is held with care. This is where the transition from friendship to something deeper often begins, not through sudden romantic gestures, but through emotional courage. When someone allows themselves to be seen more fully, something shifts in the dynamic. The relationship becomes more real, more grounded, more emotionally textured, and with that depth, affection often begins to change shape. A conversation feels heavier in meaning, silence feels more intimate, presence feels more significant. Even simple gestures can take on emotional weight. A longer moment of eye contact, a softer tone when speaking, a pause before saying goodbye that feels like it carries unspoken feeling. Even something as gentle as a forehead kiss offered without expectation can become an expression of emotional truth rather than physical desire, because vulnerability changes how love is expressed. It moves affection from surface interaction into emotional language. But vulnerability also requires balance. It is not about exposing everything to everyone. It is about choosing where honesty can be held safely, where truth can be received with respect. Because the purpose of vulnerability is not to be wounded, it is to be understood. And in spiritually aligned connection, vulnerability becomes mutual over time. Both people begin to open, both begin to trust, both begin to reveal parts of themselves that were previously hidden. And in that shared openness, something rare begins to form, not just attraction, but emotional depth. And emotional depth is where love becomes real, because once the people have seen each other beyond the surface, it becomes much harder to pretend they do not matter. Vulnerability is the bridge, and every meaningful connection must eventually decide whether to cross it. Chapter 9. The Sacred Transition from Friend to Lover. There is a moment in certain connections where the energy begins to shift. Even if nothing has been officially said, it is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but something feels different. The friendship is still there, the conversations still flow, the comfort remains, but underneath it, an emotional depth begins to quietly expand. This is the sacred transition space between friendship and romance, a space that is often misunderstood because it does not follow clear rules. It is not purely platonic anymore, yet it is not fully defined as romantic either. It exists in a soft in-between state where feeling begins to outgrow labeling. And in this space, everything becomes more sensitive. Silences feel longer, eye contact feels deeper, presence feels heavier with meaning. Even ordinary interactions begin to carry emotional weight that was not there before. This is not something forced, it is something that unfolds naturally when emotional intimacy and energetic alignment begin to deepen over time. The transition from friend to lover is not a switch that is flipped, it is a gradual unfolding of awareness, a recognition that the way you see each other is changing. In friendship, there is comfort, there is ease, there is shared history, laughter, and emotional familiarity. But in this transitional space, something else begins to emerge. Curiosity becomes more emotionally charged. Attention becomes more intentional. The way two people speak to each other begins to soften and deepen at the same time. There is still laughter, but now it carries a different undertone. There is still comfort, but now it feels more emotionally intimate. This is where spiritual connection becomes noticeable, because spiritual connection does not rush. It evolves. It allows emotional truth to surface gradually, without forcing labels before the connection is ready to hold them. And in this unfolding, affection begins to change shape. A touch that once felt casual begins to linger. A moment of silence begins to feel meaningful instead of empty. A simple gesture begins to carry emotional significance. Sometimes it shows up in small ways. A hand held slightly longer than usual. A conversation that feels harder to end. A glance that lasts just a second too long. A moment where both people feel something unspoken, but neither interrupts it. And in some cases, affection becomes symbolic, a gentle embrace that feels more grounding than usual. A moment of stillness where presence feels emotionally overwhelming in a quiet way. Or a forehead kiss soft, intentional, and deeply calming that communicates care without needing explanation. Because in this transition space, physical gestures are no longer just physical, they become emotional language. They say what words are not yet ready to express. I see you differently now. I feel closer to you than before. There is something here that is growing. But the sacredness of this transition lies in its uncertainty. Nothing is guaranteed yet. The connection is still forming, still revealing itself. And this is where emotional awareness becomes essential. Because the transition from friendship to romance is not only about desire, it is about alignment. Do both people feel the shift? Is the emotional energy mutual? Is there openness to something deeper? Or only fear of changing what already exists? These questions are not meant to create pressure. They are meant to bring clarity. Because not every deep friendship is meant to become romantic, but every meaningful transition deserves honesty. Spiritual love does not force evolution. It observes it. It allows connection to reveal its direction over time. And when the transition is mutual, something beautiful happens. Friendship does not disappear. It transforms. The foundation of trust remains, but now it is layered with emotional intimacy that deepens connection rather than replacing it. There is still friendship, but now there is also something more tender, something more aware, something that feels like emotional closeness that has become impossible to ignore. And in that space, love is no longer an idea. It becomes an experience, not loud, not dramatic, but quietly undeniable, a feeling that grows through presence, trust, and emotional recognition. And when it is real, it does not rush to define itself. It simply continues to unfold. Chapter 10. Love that feels like home. At some point in the journey of human connection, the heart stops. searching for intensity and begins, searching for something quieter, something steadier, something that does not shake the nervous system, but settles it. This is where love begins to feel like home, not a place of fantasy, not a place of emotional chaos or constant uncertainty, but a presence that feels grounding, familiar, and deeply calming. Many people are conditioned to believe that love must feel overwhelming to be real, that it must come with emotional highs and lows, uncertainty and pursuit, longing and relief. But spiritual love does not always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it arrives like still water, and stillness is often mistaken for absence, when in reality it is presence without disturbance. Love that feels like home does not require constant proving. It does not rely on emotional instability to feel alive. Instead, it creates a sense of safety where two people can simply exist, without fear of being misunderstood or discarded. In this kind of connection, silence is not uncomfortable. It is peaceful. You can sit together without needing to fill every moment with words. You can exist in each other's presence without performance. There is a quiet understanding that does not require explanation. This is what emotional safety feels like when it becomes consistent. The nervous system relaxes. The mind stops overanalyzing every interaction. The heart no longer feels like it must constantly protect itself. And in that space, something profound begins to happen. The connection deepens not through intensity, but through trust, through repetition of care, through emotional reliability, through the experience of being consistently seen without judgment. Love that feels like home is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in ordinary ones. A conversation at the end of a long day, a shared silence that feels comfortable instead of awkward, a moment of support during difficulty without needing to ask for it, a presence that remains steady even when emotions are uncertain. These are the quiet foundations of lasting love. And over time, these small moments accumulate into something powerful, a sense that you are not alone in your emotional experience, that there is someone who understands your silence as much as your words, someone who notices your emotional shifts without needing them to be explained, someone who simply stays. This kind of love is often underestimated because it does not demand attention. It does not create chaos. It does not rely on extremes to feel meaningful. But spiritually, it is deeply significant because it offers what most human beings unconsciously crave: emotional rest. In this space, affection becomes gentle and intentional. It is no longer driven by urgency or fear, but by presence and care. A hand held with awareness, a hug that feels grounding, a forehead kiss that carries quiet reassurance rather than expectation. These gestures are not about intensity, they are about emotional truth. They communicate, "You are safe with me, you do not need to perform here, you can simply be yourself." And perhaps that is the highest form of love, not the kind that excites the nervous system into uncertainty, but the kind that allows it to exhale. Love that feels like home is not about losing passion. It is about transforming passion into peace. It is about choosing someone not out of emotional fear, but out of emotional clarity. Not because you need them to complete you, but because being with them feels like returning to something familiar within yourself. A sense of alignment, a sense of grounding, a sense of being emotionally understood without effort. And in that understanding, something sacred becomes clear. Real love is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet feeling of being exactly where you are meant to be, with someone who makes your inner world feel less like a battlefield and more like home. Conclusion: the kiss that sees the soul. Every human heart, at some point, searches for a kind of love that does not demand performance, a love that does not confuse intensity with truth, a love that does not require self-abandonment to feel connection, a love that does not disappear when life becomes quiet. And somewhere within that search, we begin to understand something subtle but profound. Not all affection is the same. Some forms of love are loud, consuming, and temporary. Others are quiet, steady, and deeply enduring. And among the quietest expressions of love, there is one gesture that carries a meaning far beyond its simplicity: a forehead kiss. It is not dramatic. It does not ask for attention. It does not announce itself with urgency or desire. Instead, it arrives softly, almost like a prayer made physical. A forehead kiss speaks a language that does not require words. It communicates presence without pressure, care without control, and intimacy without expectation. It says, I see you beyond your surface. I honor your mind, your heart, and your becoming. You are safe in this moment. In a world that often equates love with intensity, the forehead kiss reminds us that true connection is not always about passion alone. It is about emotional safety. It is about recognition. It is about the nervous system finally exhaling in the presence of another human being. This is the deeper journey we have explored, from friendship to emotional intimacy, from vulnerability to energetic awareness, from attachment to soulful love, from fear of loss to the courage of truth. And through it all, one truth remains constant. Love does not begin with possession. It begins with presence. Some friendships will remain friendships. Some connections will shift and evolve. Some will deepen into romance, and some will simply teach us what it means to feel seen. But the most meaningful connections are rarely the ones that arrive with chaos. They are the ones that arrive with peace. Because peace is not emptiness. It is alignment. It is the feeling of being emotionally understood, without needing to explain every part of yourself. It is the quiet recognition that your presence matters to someone who does not try to change you in order to love you. As this journey comes to a close, it is important to remember that spiritual love is not something to be forced, chased, or controlled. It is something to be recognized. It reveals itself in energy, in consistency, in emotional safety, in the way two souls feel when they are simply together, and sometimes in a single gentle gesture that carries more meaning than words ever could. A forehead kiss, not as an endpoint, but as a reminder that love, at its highest form, is not about possession or performance. It is about seeing and being seen. It is about standing in the presence of another human being and feeling, without confusion or fear, I am safe here. And perhaps that is the quiet truth beneath every love story worth remembering. Not how loudly it began, but how peacefully it allowed the heart to rest.